Thank you very much for joining us today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. So I'm David Blockstein. I am the co-director of the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice, which is a project of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College. Today, our focus is going to be on both the COP27 conference, which you have heard about, and the COP17 Youth Conference, which you might not have heard about, or the COY, not Convention of Youth, the conference at 17. And we have three speakers, two of whom attended the COP and one of whom attended the youth conference. And so they're each going to share their impressions about the conferences, and especially from the perspective of education and how education was discussed and what the outcomes are. So I'll introduce each of them in their time of speaking, but first I want to turn to my colleague and friend, Ian Goodstein, the director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College and the creator and co-director of the Worldwide Teach-In.
Thanks, David. Thank you all for joining us today. And I'm really excited to hear about kind of the education, the global education initiatives underway through COP and the Conference of Youth. I want to talk with you briefly about the opportunity to get involved with the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice. This is an initiative out of the Bard Graduate Programs in Sustainability that's been underway for several years. And it's essentially a stronger together kind of vision. So I'm just going to share my screen here briefly, and in particular, take you to our website. So the Worldwide Teach-In is really a call to educators around the world, K-8, high school, graduate, to take advantage of our platform to publicize events happening on your campus around climate and justice in the spring. The particular call for the teach-in is March 29th, which is a Wednesday, but really anytime in that period. And if you go to our website, which is just worldwideteachin.org, this is what you find. And there is a 10-minute video right here that kind of lays out the vision of the teach-in, and has a lot of really good models in some detail about essentially, how to reach out beyond the 30 or so students who will come to a climate, oriented event on campus if you hold one. And the theory of change behind the teach-in really is that there are a growing number, 50, 60, 70% of educators at any given institutions who are deeply climate concerned. And they're not climate experts, right? They're not teaching climate change courses. They're not talking about it in the classrooms. How can we get them involved and really create a cross-disciplinary conversation about climate solutions? So how can we get psychologists talking about, what it means to be a climate psychologist, or economists talking about how can you use economics to solve climate change, or a chemist talking about climate change solutions in an introductory chemistry course. So that's the thesis. We've got lots of ideas, and we'll talk more about them at the end of the call today. I do want to just point out that if you go to this place right here, the register your event, it'll pop up right to our interactive map right here. And we'd urge you to please sign in. Once you've got your event in mind, go ahead and register it on our map. We're trying to get 1,000 events around the world, 1 million participants. So we need your help. And you don't have to know what you're going to do yet. So, for example, if I click on this button right here, it'll pop up to the something in Vienna, Austria. Doesn't tell us exactly what's happening, something affiliated with the EGU conference, it looks like. So exciting, but you can add more information to these online registration forms as your event grows. So with that, David, let me turn it back over to you for our conversation from our panelists. Thank you all for joining us, and stick around. After the panelists are done, we'll have further conversation about how to get involved with the Worldwide Teach-In. Tobias, maybe you could drop a few links in the chat to direct people to these opportunities.
Right. Thank you, Eben. And Tobias is our education outreach director for the teach-in and handling all the complicated technology here. And we do invite each of you to use the chat to introduce yourself if you so desire. So through our project, we've been pleased to be working with the Earth Day organization for the past 4 years. The map that Eben showed you is actually part of the Earth Day map and technology. And I will now turn to my friend and colleague, Matt Aruch, who is the Global Education Director for Earth Day and participated in the COP. And since Matt has limited time, we'll start with you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, David, Eben, Tobias, Worldwide Teach-In Friends for giving EarthDay.org an opportunity to share our experiences as COP. Can folks hear me okay? I'm using a different set of headphones, so I have a little bit of a different schematic here. For those of you who are unfamiliar with our organization, we are responsible for organizing and facilitating and supporting Earth Day events around the world. In addition, we have a number of streams of activities that are kind of a more traditional environmental NGO work around plastics or education or reforestation. My area of expertise is in education, and I run the Global Education Program. And as part of that program, with support of the organization and lots of different collaborators, we were able to pull off the first ever education-focused pavilion space at COP27. So for those of you who have unfamiliar with kind of the way COP is laid out, there's a negotiating space that's kind of in one area, and then there's this pavilion space inside of the blue zone, which is where the negotiations happen, and there's another area that's called the green zone that has different sets of permissions that I'm still learning about as well. But inside of this blue zone pavilion space, different countries, different organizations have all create these kind of pavilions where they showcase their work and the work of kind of thematic areas of interest. So in our climate education hub, we were able for the first time to bring together the education community and give them a place to convene within this pavilion to share out their work within the climate community. And, you know, regardless of how you feel about the outcomes of the COP, I'm very proud of what we were able to accomplish as an organization in terms of bringing in a really interesting diverse set of actors from around the world who are kind of big legacy actors that you would think about: UNESCO, the Global Partnership for Education, the Smithsonian Institution here in the United States, but also lots of kind of smaller grassroots level community-based organizations, indigenous kind of advocacy groups like the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities, small youth-led NGOs like Empodera Clima, out of Brazil, Friendship NGO in Bangladesh. We were able to kind of organize a big youth climate education coalition that kind of used our space to bring together about 50 youth coalitions together into one space. So we're really able to kind of use the COP as an organizing space to move forward on the road to COP28 and beyond. And our goal here was, one, to kind of center and elevate the work of education within the climate community, but two, to ensure that education was on the COP agenda at COP27, which moderately successful, but will be much more successful as we move to COP28. So there's already a group of folks that are really looking at this roadmap to COP28 in Dubai, and that includes representatives from United Arab Emirates, such as Dubai Cares, different foundations that are based around the world, Aga Khan Foundation, folks in like the Learning Planet Institute that are really thinking about how do we build that roadmap include education in COP28. So I will stop there so I have time to field any questions, but overall was a really successful, from my point of view, a very, very successful event and set of events. I'll put the link to the pavilion in the chat so you can look at all the different programming. So you'll find our agenda and then the links to the different events that were there. So if folks have questions or want to follow up, I'll also put my email in here. Feel free to reach out. And then happy to have a few minutes, can answer any questions before I have to run and meet our global education team for our morning meeting or evening meeting for most of them, actually.
Great, thank you, Matt. It's really very exciting to hear about, and I knew something of what you were doing, but so it's great to hear about some of the energy that you've created and moving forward to the next COP. Are there specific questions that anyone wants to ask, or general questions you want to ask to Matt? You can just unmute yourself if you have a question, or raise your hand, but we're a small enough group. Just go ahead and unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Darshana Gupta.
Yes.
I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I'm a climate reality chapter chair. So my question to you, Matthew, is I joined a little late, so you must have answered that question. But in terms of education, so they had just like biodiversity or any other big points. Did they like talk on the education, because education is very important. Educate people, educate students and employees on this issue is very critical at this point. So we all can chip in. So what exactly they talked about, or what was the action, or maybe next COP action? What did they suggest? I'm sorry, I missed the front part.
So I'll try to answer that question. It's a big question. So COP was 2 weeks, and we programmed approximately 50 to 60 events. I'm not exactly sure. So within that kind of set of activities, there was a really broad and diverse range of kind of initiatives that were proposed. So everyone kind of had a different perspective on the thing that you're describing, right? So UNESCO, for example, used our pavilion as well as other pavilions to talk about their greening education partnership. So in their event in the morning, they brought together some youth actors that participated in their kind of outreach for their survey. And then they used other spaces to kind of launch this greening education partnership, which is a global partnership that they're looking at on greening schools in the lead up to the next COP and beyond, right? So they have kind of a 3 or 5 year vision for that. Other groups, for example, were sharing a little bit about their education research, right? We used the space, and what was really nice for me is we had an opportunity to bring our global education team together for the first time, right? We're used to meeting virtually, and we were able to be in the same space at the same time. And we used 1 hour as a panel just for us to talk on the stage about the work that we're doing, and had it moderated by someone from the Global Partnership for Education, and gave people a chance to ask us questions. So everybody kind of had a different vision in terms of what's happening next. The push that came out of this is that we really need education as one of the pillars of the COP negotiating agenda. So that's really where I think a lot of these actors are, at least at the policy level, are going to be thinking at the kind of more grassroots level. I think a lot of what we were able to do was build awareness, raise awareness, and then kind of help folks make connections to like-minded partners from around the world. So hopefully we're able to kind of support and kind of catalyze some of that coalition building that's happening within these spaces, kind of regionally and globally, depending on what folks' interests were.
All right, thank you.
We did have someone from Climate Reality Project Brazil who I really enjoyed speaking with while I was there. And that's
Great. Yeah,
to-
it's a great program and it's a free
Mhm.
training for anybody to take. So that will, different languages, different countries, because they rotate between US and other countries. So people should take advantage. It's free, and Mr. Gore is giving himself a training with other experts. So that is great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And Jay, thank you for putting all these links in the chat. Did you have anything you wanted to ask Matt?
Hi, no, I'm good. I was very happy to know there was a focus on, as much as it was the side event and the light that should have been shown on the importance of education was diminished. I'm happy that you were that was there, that section was there, and the youth voice especially was there. The intergenerational aspect was so important. Thank
Okay.
you.
we
Michael?
were acknowledged by Youngo and I can't remember the name of the other group, but we had the most youth-focused events of any pavilion other than the youth pavilion at the COP. So we are also very proud of that.
Okay, so that's a metric. Michael asks, are there any metrics, as he usually does? So, and anything else you wanted to share in terms of data, Matt?
So it's hard at this point. We're still kind of distilling the information, but we have the and I can find it if folks are interested, the kind of demographic information of kind of how many eyeballs were on the screen. We can also look at like geographically where participants were, but it's going to be hard to know at this point kind of what the impacts were of the COP on practice. So I don't have a great answer for that right now, but certainly, these, and I can be critical of the COP as well. It was, it's very convention centery inside of that pavilion space, but even within the pavilion itself, there was a lot of energy and kind of network building and coalition building that was taking place, and hopefully that will, and those metrics are always complicated to measure, right? How much does this pavilion play a role in the work that so-and-so and I, or so-and-so and someone else will do in the future together because they met in our pavilion? Who knows, right? So hopefully we can be a catalyst for some of that work down the road, and we'll have a better answer for you, Michael, in the weeks, months, and years to come.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. I know you delayed your staff meeting a little bit for us, so thank you for joining us. And certainly, yes, the ultimate metric, I guess, is when the world leaders recognize that education is a key strategy for climate mitigation and adaptation and resilience. But we're working on that. So let's thank Matt, and let's turn to Noa Dalzell, who is a Climate Policy Associate with Second Nature. Second Nature is another of our partner organizations on the Worldwide Teach-In, and thank you, Noa, for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you, David. So yeah, I've been with Second Nature for about 1.5 years. I'm our Climate Policy Associate. And for those of you who don't know Second Nature, we're an organization committed to accelerating climate action in and through higher education. And we also have something called the Climate Leadership Network, which provides resources, networking, and national engagement opportunities for signatory institutions. So essentially institutions that commit to one of our commitments, whether that's the carbon neutrality commitment or climate resilience. And that's kind of one of our core flagship programs. My role is a little bit different. I work on I lead our policy efforts. And so one of my primary goals is to get higher education to be more willing to be politically engaged on climate policy advocacy issues. So not just the decarbonization of the sector, but also using its political capital to move legislation forward and to ensure that, at all levels of government, so at the state, federal, and global levels. So one, tangible example of this would look like, for example, say there was an energy efficiency bill in Ohio, like let's get Ohio State to be engaged on that effort, sign on to a letter, meet with legislators, that sort of thing. And so that has been our focus, and we've been kind of looking to tackle this issue from a number of angles. And then personally, my background is in climate policy advocacy. Prior to working at Second Nature, I worked at an organization called Climate Exchange, where I led our state climate policy network for a couple of years. And I've attended the last 3 COPs, Madrid, Glasgow, and Sharm el-Sheikh. So it's been great to see that higher ed has been increasingly on the agenda and increasingly present at the negotiations, and also at, mostly at the Blue Zone, as Matthew mentioned. And one of the ways that we've been working to achieve this, emphasis on policy advocacy and trying to get higher ed more involved is via the academic community, just kind of recognizing the barriers that exist right now at the institutional level to more political engagement. So we have a working group at Second Nature called the Academics for Climate Advocacy Working Group. And it's a working group of around 400 academics from across the country, from all different institution types, who are working to push their schools to become more engaged on climate policy issues. And we meet quarterly, and COP was a really great opportunity to meet with a lot of the academics in this space, just to get to know one another, convene. And I think, as Matthew said, it's hard to measure the success and impact of those types of initiatives just because we don't know what will come, in the months and years to come. But it was great to have kind of that convening spot at COP. And at this most recent COP, Second Nature hosted a higher education reception. So we had a room with America's All in Pavilion one night where we had all, academics and, presidents and students all come and convene at this one center, and then really just spend a couple of hours getting to know one another and discussing how higher ed can play more of a role in climate action, both, within the US and globally. We also had a panel at the America's All in Pavilion about kind of the whole of higher ed approach. And actually at the Climate Education Pavilion, the earthday.org one, we helped facilitate one of those panels. And I can say I spent a lot of time at that pavilion myself, and definitely it was great to have a higher ed, an education focused pavilion at the COP, and really a strong focus on all of that. Prior to COP, we had sent out a form to a lot of our partners, and almost 100 individuals filled that out, confirming that they would be at COP. That can, includes, from colleges and universities in the US, and that includes professors, undergrad and grad students, sustainability coordinators, energy officers, alumni, department heads, presidents themselves. So we knew going into COP that from our own community, there was a pretty sizable number of individuals, and, plus many more that we hadn't initially connected with. And they came from really institutions all across the country. So we had, BU, Colby College, Emory, George Washington, Northeastern, Penn State, Arizona, University of Michigan. So dozens of other institutions represented. And, for some, you see they have a student delegation, and you have 5 to 10 students with a professor that are there really for a key educational purpose. And then other times it would be, a standalone professor, or maybe even a delegation from the institution themselves. So it was great to see kind of the different ways that higher education institutions were badged and present at COP. Most of the events at COP, in my experience, are centered around climate education and the curricula itself. Ensuring that the science of climate change is taught, that students need to be educated on the impacts of climate change, on what an equitable clean energy transition looks like. So that's what, Matthew mentioned. I think a lot of the Climate Education Hub events were centered around that. Something of note that was interesting was just looking at UNESCO's announcement, the UN's Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Arm, which unveiled the Greening Education Partnership, which essentially asked countries to set goals by 2030 and monitor progress in a couple of target areas, including making schools' physical infrastructure more sustainable, updating curricula, looking at building capacity for teachers and communities, and then also looking beyond the school itself and building climate education into communities more, at large. So that's not something that Second Nature was involved with, but just something to note. And UNESCO is a good a good kind of entity to continue following as we're looking at how education will continue to be involved at the COP, at the COP level. Personally, I think, some personal observations from my time at the conference, it's clear that, education and higher education is increasingly part of the discussion. You're bumping into more individuals from the space. There are more kind of informal conversations. Obviously, there was the Climate Education Hub, which was a great one to see. And I think a lot of people felt that there was a home for this space at the negotiations and at the conference. Especially seeing that there was, institutions from all across the world. I had lots of great conversations from institutions from different countries and different, youth groups and higher ed groups. At the same time, I think that there's a clear need for more of our presence from higher ed leadership, particularly as it relates to being politically engaged and willing to influence climate legislation. One of the challenges that we've been facing at Second Nature and largely in this work is that schools have so many priorities that are really related to their bottom line when it comes to making, budget asks or having a policy, policy priorities, that it's hard to get climate on their forefront, on their priority list when they're not viewing it as directly relevant to their work. Obviously, we here all know that it is directly relevant to all of us. So that's kind of been the big challenge that we have faced is in trying to get that to change. And so really a focus for us has been the non-moral case for higher education and climate policy advocacy, the business case. So forget the climate science, forget the environmental injustice. Obviously, those are the things that drive us, and it's why we're doing this work. But in our communication with schools, focusing more on the bottom line and some of the financial reasons why this is something that they want to get involved with, even looking at things like sustainability rankings and how students increasingly are prioritizing climate, climate advocacy and climate leadership in their school selection process. So that's something that I think in future COPs, we'd love to see what that leadership can look like and what types of, policy engagement we can see. And, most of that, most of my work is focused in the US and at the state level and at the local level where schools can have the largest influence. But I think that as we continue to build this forward and we try to move towards a world where higher education is really playing a leadership role in the push for climate action and climate policy, that is translated at COP as well, so that it's less of just the informal conversations and the networking and the youth events and focus on curriculum. And it's really about the fact that we know that in higher education institutions have so much political capital and resources, and they employ so many people and they have so much money, and there's really a big influence to have. So that's kind of a looking ahead and what we're hoping for in the coming years. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Noah, for a very comprehensive report in terms of what happened, what you're thinking, where you're trying to move forward on this. So I've got there's a couple of or I guess one particular question in the chat, which is, were there any successful education-based action program case studies presented? A lot of adjectives there, but I think, can you respond to that at all? I guess in terms of presentations of where education programs are engaged in climate action.
Yeah, I wish I remembered the name of the school. There was a school from Kenya that had shared information around how kind of the building up the knowledge around climate change and what that looks like. And there was actually a delegation of students that were present that were basically there to represent their communities. And it was all based off of a climate education program at their institution. And the professor was there as well. I saw a few of those where there was as a delegation of students from a developing country or from, a background that they didn't know anything about climate change until they took this class or they took this, engage in a particular program. And now they were here at COP with a particular agenda looking to speak for their communities. And so that was a common pattern throughout. And I think is one of the key successes when we look at how, education plays out at COP. And so talking to, students between the ages of, 18 and 25 and hearing about their experiences and what one course or one professor or one, after school program did to get them there. And now they're going to specific events and pushing forward the specific agenda. That was something that I saw kind of throughout.
Okay, Thank you. Yeah, and we're going to hear from one such youth in a few minutes here. Are there other questions for Noa? You covered so much that I think people are just trying to absorb and catch up. I guess while others are thinking about questions, I guess one question for you, Noa. Second Nature being a US based organization, do you have partner organizations that you're working with in other countries that have a similar approach, or at least a similar mission?
Yeah, to my knowledge, not a whole lot yet, but I know that as we've been thinking about how to kind of build upon our work, Second Nature has been around for a long time. That's something that's coming in the future, is looking at some of those international partnerships potentially. And I can also say that schools to date have been mostly US focused, but that's something else that we're looking at, is working with schools internationally and ensuring that they also can kind of benefit from the resources. So no specific ones that I can point to right now, but that's definitely been something that we've been thinking about, particularly as we've been attending the COP for the last few years and recognizing the opportunities that exist there.
Yeah, well, that may be something for us to talk about with you and your president Tim Carter and maybe others. Just given that we do have some good international connections.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of that, let me transition then to Samar, who is Samar Kanatov, who is a student at American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan, a school that we worked very closely with through the American University, through the Open Society University Network that supports our project. And Samar is currently with another of our OSIN partners at Central European University in Europe. And we've been pleased to actually provide some financial support for Samar in his organizing work, both at his universities and globally. So Samar participated in the conference of youth that preceded COP27. So go ahead, Samar, and why don't you educate us about that conference and the role of youth?
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Yeah, greetings from Vienna. It's a pleasure to me to share today with the outcomes of the Conference of Youth on Climate Change that also took place in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt right before COP. And let me quickly share my screen with you for the couple of slides that I prepared. Oh, it's not really letting me share. Okay, I think
Tobias, can you help us, Samar?
Yeah, I'll make you the host. Maybe.
Yeah, I think I am host, but it's my computer settings that do not allow sharing, which might take a bit if I do that now. So I think I'll proceed without the slide then.
Okay.
So the Conference of Youth on Climate Change is, which like in short we call it COI, is an annual youth event that takes place before COP, and it is powered by YOUNGO, the youth constituency of the UN Convention on Climate Change. And each year, basically, Conference of Youth gathers hundreds of climate youth delegates from different countries for climate negotiations and preparations for COP. And this year I participate as a country delegate from Kyrgyzstan. And I feel like many people might have not heard about the conference. So essentially COI has 4 pillars of it, which are capacity building, cultural exchange, skill building workshops, and policy document. And most of the part of COI is all about learning, through the pillars of capacity building, skill building, and cultural exchange. But also the big part of it is policy development, which is the global use statement on climate change that is developed on the conference and then addressed to COP. And so this is the big document that is developed by all the delegates with their documents that their statements that they brought from their countries, and then like it is united for all the young delegates at COP to use for advocacy. And so there is a structure to Conference of Youth that is like that has several stages, and Conference of Youth itself is a global event, but it also has its preceding stages, which are more grassroots level, and those are local and regional versions of the conference. They are called accordingly LCOIs and ERCOIs, which are local and regional COIs. And LCOIs are carried out in every country voluntarily in any format to gather use of different countries and develop their statements, demands and commitments to climate change, and also on regional levels. And the examples of that is LCOIs in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan that we've held. And also this year we organized the Regional Conference of Youth in Central Asia, uniting the 5 countries, and developed the regional statement of youth on climate change with the demands, commitments that we, every LCOI and ERCOI can then send to Yango, that will present all these statements in the global youth statement that will be used for advocacy then at COP. And the main outcome of the COP27 this year was also the annual global youth statement that was addressed this year to COP27, and which you can find on the COP27 website. I will share the link with you later. This is a big comprehensive document that contains all the contains many pillars of climate action, demands and commitments that come from different parts of the world, presented by the youth delegates. And in the heart of this document is ACE, which is Action for Climate Empowerment, of which most of you must have heard before. And for those who have not, ACE is part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, in the Paris Agreement, Article 12, and also in the Glasgow Work Programme from the last year's Glasgow Pact. Action for Climate Empowerment is basically the biggest, let's say, the strategy or a program that the world has agreed on for climate action, which is based on 6 elements of, first of all, education, public awareness, training, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation. And it is carried out, or it is meant to be carried out in the values of inclusion, youth, gender, and all the other aspects, engagement, capacity building, and partnership. And that is, ACE is in the heart, as I said, of the global youth statement that was produced at COI this year. And COI itself, the Conference of Youth, is the all about ACE. And I think all the local conference of youth, regional conferences, this global conference, and also the worldwide teachings that we are doing is they are all in the framework of ACE that is implemented on different levels. And worldwide teachings, for example, is is an example of implementing on grassroots community levels. And so from this perspective, I think the Conference of Youth itself is the all about education, and it is about education for one of the most, for me, parts of climate action, which is climate empowerment for government, climate governance, and climate governance and management for climate decision making, which is based on all these levels from local to regional and global, and reflected in this document. And from the content of the conference itself, I think one of my personal takeaways was a participation in this session from, I have this picture here. It's a pity that I cannot show you, but the UN NGO on spirituality, and which is Brahma Kumaris, they have their environment initiative, and they held several sessions on spirituality and climate education and environmental awareness through spirituality. And it was one of the highlights for me, and which also reminded me of the principles of our worldwide teachings too, that climate education and climate awareness, environmental awareness does not matter, that it doesn't care on the which field it is being implemented in, or the department in universities, or the subject in school, and that it is needed in every pillar, in every aspect of our lives, and also in this spiritual organization and spiritual community, not communities, like spiritual organizations too. And concluding with the COI, like with all the other conferences and events on climate change and other environmental agenda, I think after we have done this, after we have constituted this big policy document, and after we addressed it on the COP to our leaders, I think there's always a question. So how do I now come back to my community and bring all this commitments and demands that I'm presenting to my action, and also how we bring back ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment, and all its 6 values to our communities on grassroots level. And I am now left with this question, and I think Worldwide Teachings is one of the answers for that. Thank you so much. I'll conclude with that.
Yeah, thank you, Samar, for the great presentation. And Samar, if you want to send us a copy of your presentation, maybe send it as a PDF, and then what we will do is we will send the recording of this presentation and your images, and know if you have any links or anything that you want to share. We'll send that to each of you who is joining us today, as well as to other people who have registered but are unable to join us.
Yes,
so that way we can make sure that they do, that everybody has an opportunity to view them. So are there any specific questions for Samar? There are a couple of general questions, but let's see if there's specific questions for Samar first, or comments. Maybe, I know we have some other students who are on this Zoom conversation. Any of you want to share any thoughts in terms of engagement of students and connections with the youth and Action for Climate Empowerment? Your thoughts as to how we better connect that with the Worldwide Teach-In and with other climate activities moving forward? So I guess let me others may be thinking about questions. So Samar, in terms of this Action for Climate Empowerment, who are the leaders in driving this agenda forward?
Basically, Action for Climate Empowerment is the term that is integrated in the, like as I said, in Paris Agreement and then the Glasgow Pact, and that is has been signed for by the participating countries of COP and other countries, all the countries that that are implementing the Paris Agreement. But in the core of the Action for Climate Empowerment of the ACE is this partnership that has to be that is desired to be between countries, but also on all the levels, and most importantly on grassroots levels. And it is, I think, in my understanding, ideally it's it lies in on the grassroots levels, on the community, on the ownership of the local communities and their participation. And what I also love about this concept of ACE is that it is comprehensive on the engagement of young people, and also other vulnerable groups, and it is like its foremost values is education, training, and partnership.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. And go ahead, Gilbert.
Thank you very much. My question is structured as follows. As Samar is doing great job for fighting climate change, Samar, how would you rate your commitment out of 100%? Thank you.
This an amazing question that I have never been asked this. It's really interesting, and it makes me challenge many things that I'm doing. It's really challenging for me to rate my climate commitment and my actions, I guess, because we on personal level, if we look at climate action, we talk about many things. Personal commitment as being sustainable, but also that is like it is reflected, being sustainable reflected in everyday activities that we carry out. And but at the same time, there is another pillar of that of the climate action, which is education and activism that I'm doing. And I think it differs from time to time how I am sustainable in everyday life and how I am committed to my activism. And overall, I wouldn't be able to rate this my commitment, and I think it may differ from day to day how I am committed and how I implement these commitments. But yeah.
That's a great question, Gilbert, and it sort of challenges us all to think about where we stand and in the work we do. And the reality, of course, is that none of us can be 100% committed all the time because we've got lives and families and work and school, and none of us should be. I mean, honestly, No one person should shoulder the burden of being the 100% committed climate solutions activist, because that's the whole point, right? Is that we need to multiply our numbers and engage more people. And we also need to find mechanisms that are relatively, easy for people to pick up, right? Entry points for people to join the movement in ways that don't require 100% commitment, but that are okay with, 15% commitment and 22% commitment initially anyway. And that's actually a really good segue to the last 8 minutes of the presentation. And I want to talk for a minute just about one idea that we've had about how we can really tap into what is that growing concern of on the part of educators, faculty and students about climate, right? I mean, much of the work of education has nothing to do with climate change. And most educators focus no attention whatsoever on climate change. And yet, I think they want to. I mean, I think they recognize that should be part of their responsibility. So how do we do that? How do we make an on-ramp for them? And that is one of the models of the worldwide teach-in this year. And rather than showing my email, which I don't want to do, I want to show the worldwide teach-in, and I don't have it up. So let me go here. There we go. So if you go to our website and you go to the sort of our models page, there's a thing called #MakeClimateAClass. And the idea here is that students, for example, can sort of do important work in about 15 minutes around climate activism, because they can send an email to all of their teachers and ask those teachers to make climate a class sometime in the spring semester. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is that we're trying to get climate concerned teachers who aren't already talking about climate change. So somebody who's teaching a European history class, or somebody who's teaching a general chemistry class, or somebody who's teaching a Spanish class, right? To actually take half an hour and focus on how people in their discipline are thinking about climate change, right? So a European historian could talk about how historians are thinking about how climate, is now factoring into history, or a chemist can talk about, how chemists are helping solve important climate change challenges, or a Spanish teacher can bring in some articles about climate change in Spanish from, Colombia or from Madrid or Barcelona. And so all faculty have the opportunity to become climate educators and help students understand how climate change is part of their disciplines. And if we can do that, then we're going to easily get beyond the 30 or so students who will show up to a lecture or a movie about climate change and start to touch hundreds or thousands of students across the curriculum. So that is kind of one of the core ideas of the worldwide teach-in this year, is this campaign to #MakeClimateAClass. And literally, it would take students 15 minutes to do. They could ask every one of their teachers to make climate a class. We have a template email, obviously, that they can modify and send out. And if 100 students do that and they get 30 teachers to say yes, then suddenly you've got 600 students talking about climate change solutions in their classes in the spring. So this is one of kind of the ideas of how do we move people from zero engagement, right, in talking about climate solutions to 5%, but an important 5%, right, because faculty in particular have access to so many students just by virtue of the work they do. So that is sort of a core component of the teach-in. We want people to hold all campus events like they did last year, and those are popping up on our map. But we also really would like anybody who's organizing a teach-in to make a push, to just ask. People can obviously say no. It doesn't take, it's not hard to ask. I went to my faculty meeting and asked and got a lot of good positive feedback from people nodding their heads saying, yeah, that's a good idea. And then, do the little bit of follow-up that it takes to, push people a little bit harder and get them to commit. So that's a big part of what we're proposing this year, in addition to the more conventional, host an event. And on the hosted event side, we've got some cool stuff. We've got climate comedy and theater. So we're just wrapping up a global playwriting competition. So we're going to have 3 or 4 5-minute plays that theater departments can help find students to produce as part of a climate teach-in. I've got a meeting set up with our theater department director to talk with her about how can I find some students to put this on. It can be very student-driven, student-focused, student-organized. We also have a bunch of climate comedy videos from the University of Colorado that can form the foundation for a good evening conversation about how to use comedy to communicate around climate change. So a lot of opportunities associated with this. A final promotion I want to offer at this moment is that as part of the teach-in as well, we have coming up an internship, social media for climate activism for students. And this is a really cool opportunity. It's a 10-week internship. We will put you to work. We'll put those students to work, working on behalf of #MakeClimateClass and the teach-in. Students meet, with the colleagues from around the world on Mondays for 90 minutes to learn social media strategies. And then they go off and work in teams for 3 hours a week on those strategies. After 10 weeks, they get a certificate of participation. They get, I'll write them a letter of recommendation. So it is a real internship, unpaid internship, virtual and open to anybody from around the world. And Tobias will drop the link, I hope, to the teach-in if he hasn't already in the chat. Is that in events? I can't remember where it's located.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Just scroll down.
Oh,
Yeah, right, just follow the calendar. Yeah, right there. Yeah, and Tobias has put the link into the chat.
Okay. Right. So just some ideas about ways to bring people into this on-ramp to get them more deeply engaged as part of the teach-in, and a final appeal to everyone to please, if you're affiliated with an institution, then do sign up as soon as possible. Even if it's going to be a virtual event, if Second Nature wants to do a virtual event, somehow affiliated with the teach-in, please do register it on our map, because we need those bubbles, right? That's really what engages people and sort of helps build the momentum behind the teach-in. So David, I'll turn it over to you to wrap, and thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, well, thank you. This has all been great. And I'll just say, in terms of commitment, the first time I met Samar was on a Zoom call maybe a year ago, and he looked so cold and miserable. And I said, what time is it? And he said, it's 2 in.the morning and I'm freezing. But there he was on a call with us. So I think your commitment is very high, Samar. So 2 final things. One is that, as I put in the chat, we will be continuing this discussion about the COP27 this evening, US time, 9 p.m. US time. I know that's very late for those of you around the world, but we'll try to record that as well. We have 2 different speakers, 2 US academics, a ecologist, Gillian Bowser from Colorado State University, and an English professor who is working with us on our climate theater competition, Phoebe Godfrey from University of Connecticut. So join us or share the word with others, and we'll send you the link to that one as well. And then finally, just to thank our speakers once again. I've learned so much, and thank all of you for joining us and for your work. And we look forward to continued partnership with you in climate education and advancing climate justice. So thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you. A nice one.
Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
All right.
Okay, well done, David. Thanks for
Yeah.
gathering everybody together, and we'll see you.
Yep. Yep. So stop the recording and thank you for.
You are the host, so you need to do that.
Okay, Tobias. Yeah. So if you can save the recording and post it.